Recording. All right.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, maybe to some people. Brendan Patterson, President of Product Management here. Excited to present about cloud security, a topic close to my heart. It's one of the more interesting areas I think we did here at Watch. I'm going to be joined by John Berg, and John is a program manager at WatchGuard who's responsible for technical. And so as we work with ecosystem partners in all sorts of different areas, John is the one who coordinates with them, works with our QA teams to make sure everything is documented. We hit the requirements for our partners. We're also going to be joined by Tony Kai at Nerdio, since specifically we're going to talk about the Nerdio integration we've worked on here. But first, I'm going to start and just talk about cloud in general, why you need to secure things, what are some of the approaches available, what does WatchGuard have that can help in this area. Then I'll turn it over to John, and John's going to run through some of the integration documentation that Lane mentioned. A lot of really comprehensive stuff we have there. Sorry. So to begin with, I like to, there's a study I've been doing for a few years now that a company, Flexera, puts out called the State of the Cloud Report. I first did this back in 2016, and they continue to update it every year. And one of the stats in there that really caught my attention is small and mid-sized businesses, and they define that as a business less than 1,000 people. SMBs have really adopted the public cloud. 65% of workloads are in the public cloud from the respondents of these surveys, and another 5% expected to be added in the next 12 months. First question we kind of ask ourselves these days is, how is COVID going to affect that? It's turned our world upside down in so many ways. And based on this, it kind of matches up with the evidence I've heard. We expect it's only going to accelerate the trend towards more cloud adoption. You can see down here in the lowest bar, small and mid-sized business, a total of 50% of them plan to do more cloud computing than expected, either slightly higher than planned or significantly higher than planned because of COVID, and that's out of 187 respondents on that. If you're interested in cloud, what's happening, I recommend that Flexera report is available free on their website. Market share is interesting too. There's so many cloud providers. AWS probably has been for a long time the most dominant one. We've seen Azure really increase market over the last few years too, catching up with that, and then Google putting up investment in this area too. The data analyst shows is that Azure is responsible for 20% of money that's spent on the cloud. Data also shows that 29% of cloud workloads are in Azure. And I think what that really points to is when you look at SMB, Microsoft has always had an SMB-friendly channel, where AWS is more direct from a marketplace. AWS has the big nexus of the world, but Azure is commonly used by the type of partners that WatchGuard's working with, people like members of TAG. And in fact, I would say in our install base, surveyed people a couple of times at our partner conference, of our partners are using Azure as AWS for their cloud computing today. So we see a lot of adoption of cloud, but still can be some things holding companies back. And what's holding people back from doing more in the cloud? And the number one concern we hear in survey after survey or data is security. The example I provide here is from Gartner. 66% of respondents to a Gartner questionnaire said their biggest concern was sensitive data being uploaded to the cloud. Pick your survey. The Flexera one I like, it says about 80% cited security as a big concern of moving to the cloud. So it's probably the #1 issue that people are concerned with. And you know what? Valid. All of the security threats that you need to be prepared to handle on site, nearly all of them apply in the cloud too. And it may feel like it's somewhat more out of your control because you've given over a lot of the responsibility to that to your cloud provider. A couple of things I want to highlight here. Wall Street Journal article about a Capital One data breach in the cloud. You may remember about it last year because it was really big. 100 million PII, or details of people were exposed in that Capital One breach. And it ended up costing them about $80 million. That's why it hits the headlines in the Wall Street Journal. And the article in the journal was headlined, "Human Error, Often the Culprit in Cloud Data Breaches." And often when the story first comes out, it's like, oh, data in the cloud gets breached. It's not safe in the cloud and things like that. But when you drill down and look at the detail, and for example, in this Capital One example, they specifically called out, for instance, a flawed firewall allowed the hacker to gain access to a server hosted on Amazon's AWS service. And the company said in its disclosure that AWS wasn't to blame. It was human error configuring a firewall. Same kind of we've been dealing with here, whether it's on-prem, configuring physical firewalls, or when we move to the cloud. And so many of the same threats we need to defend against in the on-prem world also affect us in the cloud too. Secplicity is WatchGuard's blog and security information site where we publish a lot of thought leader content and great security articles. One of our predictions for this year was ransomware is going to target the cloud this year. Same type of threats you have to deal with on-prem, you need to be worried about in the cloud too. Now, it's different, so who's responsible? And both AWS and Microsoft publish what they call shared responsibility models. Just going to highlight the AWS one quickly, since Azure is mainly concerned about, but what I thought was interesting here is just the parallels with what Microsoft talk about. AWS break it into at more the physical layer, the compute, the storage regions. They're responsible for security of the cloud, but they say the customer is responsible for security in the cloud. Just because you've moved your applications, your operating system, your network into the cloud, it still means you're still responsible for that security in the cloud, just like you would be in a physical data center. Microsoft does something very similar too, and I've provided the link to it directly here. They call it the shared responsibility model. And depending on whether it's software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, at the middle layer there for things like application and networks, responsibility varies depending on that type of service. But we're really concerned here with the infrastructure as a service. You're moving workloads into Azure. And you can see in that case, the cloud provider, Microsoft, they're responsible for the physical security. You don't have to worry anymore about putting locks on a data center, having badge readers, making sure only the appropriate people get access, things like that. But all of the usual stuff, the information, the data, accounts and identities are so important. How you secure the applications, your network controls, what you're doing at the operating level, are things getting patched appropriately? You know, when you move workloads to the cloud, you're still responsible and you still have to do a lot of the same things you would just do in a physical data center. So one of the first type of security we apply, and we've seen so much of it in COVID so far, is VPN connectivity. So many people have hybrid models where they have some workloads on-prem, some in the cloud. If you're setting up communication between your premise and your cloud environment, you need to secure that with the VPN. And Microsoft Azure published a list of validated VPN devices and device configuration guides. And I've got the link to that there, and you'll see that WatchGuard is published and supported for both policy-based, which are the simpler, more static VPNs, and the route-based or dynamic VPNs. And just like we'll talk about with Nerdio later here, we've gone through the integration with Azure. We've published detailed configuration guides on how to set up secure tunnels from your on-prem environment to an Azure cloud. That's just going directly to the Azure networking. You haven't set up any WatchGuard firewall or anything like that. So as workloads move away from physical devices from the data center, WatchGuard has invested in virtual editions models. So many of you, of course, are familiar with the physical fireboxes we have today, our tabletops, our rack mount models. It was just a month ago, I was on the TAG webinar here, and I was talking about the new tabletop hardware we'd introduced, and had a great reaction in the field to that. It's doing really well. But in parallel, WatchGuard has also developed virtual versions of our appliance. We have what we call Firebox V that can run on VMware, Microsoft Hyper-V, and we've even just announced and now support KM, the open source hypervisor. In the cloud, we have a virtual version of the firewall that runs on both AWS and Azure, and we call that Firebox Cloud. Firebox Cloud is a version of our product as a data sheet available on our website, just like tabletop or rack mount models. And we've split it into 4 different editions. The Firebox Cloud Small is roughly equivalent to one of our mid-sized tabletop appliances. And then the medium, large, extra large correspond to the bigger rack mount type appliances that we have. And as you can see, we have recommended user counts. We put limits on the firewall throughput, and we have VPN tunnel numbers. So the same type of sizing parameters that you may be familiar with from the physical world for WatchGuard, published on a data sheet. Typically, we see most customers are picking between either the small or the medium when they're installing Firebox Cloud in an Azure environment. CPU core limits. A lot of times when we first got into Firebox Cloud, we expected that people were putting applications and server workloads in the cloud, and they were looking to secure server applications. But one thing we found, and we heard more and more from customers, they're basically doing everything they're doing in a physical data center in the cloud. They're using VDI to spin up virtual desktops. In many cases, they're just building environments out in the cloud that match what they used to do in a physical world years ago. And it's even more appropriate now as your scale to support remote work, as so many offices have moved remote during COVID times. So this is a snippet of the data sheet. I'm not going to go into detailed technical specs, but the key thing to highlight here is the 4 different editions we have: small, medium, large, and extra large, that you can size appropriate to your application, the environment you're building out in the cloud. Now, why would you want Firebox Cloud, a WatchGuard firewall running there? Azure provides something, right? They do. Microsoft Azure has a firewall, but it's basically a classic stateful firewall that provides access controls, protocol type controls. They have a lot of threat intel. So botnets, command and control, bad domains, phishing domains, things like that. Microsoft Azure's firewall provides good threat intel capabilities against that. But what they don't have is the full range of UTM services that we build out through our basic security and our total security packages. Geolocation, intrusion prevention, gateway antivirus, detecting malware. WatchGuard has 3 different services, layered security to prevent against malware getting into your environment. We have machine learning based detection with our intelligent AV. We do sandbox analysis with APT blocker. All of the visibility tools that you're familiar with from WatchGuard appliances apply in Firebox Cloud too. So you can send your data to our cloud hosted WatchGuard Cloud for visibility, reporting, logging, and tracking. But probably the most important thing is, if you've built out a business, you've worked with customers for years, and you've used a company like WatchGuard to secure those environments, you have a team of engineers that's trained and certified in that product. They know how to set it up and use it. WatchGuard has over 20 years experience in this area. We can certify your engineers. Our products have gone through their own certification and testing too. We were one of only 2 vendors that passed NSS Labs testing last year without getting fooled or missing any of the evasion tests. So with WatchGuard, you've got a product that your engineers and techs are trained in. They know how to set up and use. You don't want to have to go and learn a new firewall just because you've moved to a cloud environment. And as you can see from the Capital One example, so many issues can happen because a firewall is configured incorrectly. So Firebox Cloud is available. There are a couple of models people should be aware of. First, we have what we call the bring your own license model. This is the cheaper option, and we provide standard 1- and 3-year SKUs that we sell through our traditional channels. So you could purchase them through tag channel just like you would hardware. This is the option we prefer people to use. WatchGuard is a 100% channel company, and we like people to purchase licenses through our channel and then apply those licenses in the cloud. Part of the requirements of setting up a product in the cloud in both AWS and Azure is that you also have to have pay-as-you-go options in their marketplace. So pay-as-you-go is basically where you pay hourly rates for the software that's running in the environment. We've set this up so it is quite a bit more expensive. So if you were to run for a year, you would end up paying a lot more if you purchase pay-as-you-go directly from the Azure marketplace. It does have the advantage though, if you just want to do a quick trial, a quick setup, when you start a pay-as-you-go option on Azure, there's no charge for the first 30 days. It's a way to experiment, try out, and play with that Firebox Cloud that's running in Azure. Just one caveat, be aware when you do set up a trial like that, there's no way to just flip a license over to one of the BYOL licenses other than exporting your configuration file. So what does Firebox Cloud look like? You have all these techs that are trained up and understand the WatchGuard products. Well, it's not just a familiar management UI, I should say it's the same management user interface. So all of the tools you know today for setting up WatchGuard firewalls apply to the cloud too. This is an example of the web user interface. I mentioned also we have visibility. So dimension, the WatchGuard cloud visibility, all applies to Firebox Cloud too. You can even use Policy Manager, WSM Management Server. All those tools work for Firebox Cloud just like they would an on-prem appliance. There are a few caveats because the cloud is different. A lot of the layer 3 networking is handled by the cloud service itself. So for example, you don't set up the Firebox as a DHCP server. That is handled by the network configuration of Azure. So some of the things like multi-WAN, link aggregation, just don't apply so much in the cloud. And basically, the way that looks in the user interface, those options are just excluded from the WatchGuard management interface when you're applying it to the cloud. Another area that's a little different is the way we handle high availability, because you have the concept of availability zones. And so we don't have Fire Cluster supported, but we've published a pretty detailed step-by-step configuration of how to set up a pair of WatchGuard fireboxes that sit behind load balancers, and so that you can manage them across different zones. Of course, because you're in the cloud, you don't have to worry about failure of the physical hardware. The cloud provider is taking care of the underlying redundancy of that. But we've had some customers that were concerned about potential failures of the software. This is a way you can set up and apply redundancy of the firebox itself. So again, not going to go into the detail on this, but it's an example of something where we've worked with the customer and documented in detail. This is available in a knowledge base in the WatchGuard.com website, where you can log in and find out more about how this is handled. So with that, that's really a quick overview of what Firebox Cloud is. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Berg, and he's going to talk specifically what we did with Nerdio to integrate with them so we could get partners up and running using the environment. John?
Thanks, Brendan. I need to take over the screen share there.
Okay. Let me just stop sharing. Oh, sorry. Okay, I have stopped sharing, John. You should be able to take that now.
All right. We're hanging out here on the WatchGuard website. This a little bit. So if it's, just a little heads up on my position and the technology partner program. You'll find it on the WatchGuard website under partners and find a technology integration. That brings up our ecosystems list. We have around 250 integrations. To find the Nerdio integration, we just type and it comes up in the search. When you click this integration guide link, it will come up with the Nerdio integration. I won't go into huge detail here, but I will give you a couple little things. The account, of course, must have an active Azure subscriptions. Do keep in mind the amount of VM cores required for whatever you're deploying. You will need to know what Azure region you want. These are usually considered like actual locations like the west of the US, that type of thing. You'll need to know the Azure resource group. The resource groups are collections of virtual machines, storage accounts, virtual networks, databases, so on. The structure on that usually goes from the very top, the management groups, your subscriptions, the resource groups, and then the resources. When you work with this Nerdio setup, you must use an admin account with global admin access to connect to Office 365 with an owner role in Azure. The account must be either an E3 or E5 license. So we'll run through this just a little bit. You'll notice you'll get into your Nerdio for Azure account, the NFA. As administrator, you'll have to add an account. Nerdio, of course, has several different versions. In this one, we use the NFA Enterprise. You'll notice now that you're giving that permissions to the Azure AD, Office 365, and your Azure subscription. There's the region you're going to tie that to. Like this one says, of course, East. And your resource group, which you can leave empty for this one. You're going to create a new resource. You're going to add that WatchGuard Firebox Cloud. And as Brenda mentioned, there's the two options. Bring your own license or the pay-as-you-go. You create it. There's a few basic steps in the setup of the virtual machine. There's a few basic steps in the setup of the Firebox Cloud itself. We do have deployment information in our help center. First, deploy Firebox Cloud to Azure. Some people may not know about generating PuTTY keys, using PuTTY to generate these keys. So that is actually in there also. You're going to end up connecting to the Nerdio VNet. You have several subnets here, an external, a trusted. The external network security group, you're going to select management only. It's kind of what that layout looks like. You're going to create that. And you'll find the IP address. The IP address is listed over here under the public address space. You'll go to the Nerdio RG resource group. Click on the NSG DMZ for the resource group, and you're going to add that information down there with your port ranges. Actually, that's an any, basically. That's what that looks like, the NSG DMZ inbound security rules. And once that's set up, you can do your basic ping test to get outbound there. We do create other integrations with a bunch of other partners. We take those requests, we prioritize them by, what is needed by our partners, and of course, priority of Brendan there. So I will pass the screen share and our documentation again, right there in the technology partners. Just search for it, comes right up. Our general deployment guide for the Firebox Cloud to Microsoft Azure is also available.
Yeah. So I would just add, John, this is a great example of our partners coming to us with, here is a product we're using in our ecosystem and finding really useful to help us out. We need some help getting this working with WatchGuard. So we got put in touch with the folks over at Nerdio. We have a QA team that's dedicated to test third-party integrations. So we got that prioritized on our list, worked through it. We also have technical publications people dedicated to documenting these third-party integrations. And it can be tricky setting stuff up in the cloud. Just setting up a firewall in Azure alone, people, need to go through it carefully the first time. And then when you added in the Nerdio environment, it got a little confusing people. So it really helped for us to have the experts of companies working together, document out the best way to do it, and then publish that step by step as a best practice that our partners could follow when they want to add the Firebox Cloud security into their Azure environment. So it
Yeah.
really worked well here. It's a good example of a couple of companies working together to make people in the field have what they need to deploy successfully.
Can you guys expand a little bit on that? And maybe Tony, we need you to jump in. But why is it different with Azure, or when you're leveraging the Nerdio platform? Because I know you had documentation before that was how to deploy in Azure, but not necessarily with Nerdio as well, right?
I'll jump into that one.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. So Nerdio's mission was to kind of create a a fully functioning IT environment with a couple of clicks of a button, right? And we've accomplished that, right? So all we need is your global admin account and various little pieces. You make a couple of decisions right in the beginning, just like the document says, and then bam, the whole thing comes out. But the problem here is that we assumed a lot, right? We assume that everybody who does anything in Azure is going to want a DMZ, is going to want a LAN, and because we were working with partners that use all types of firewalls, we didn't really want to box ourselves into any particular firewall. So we kind of leveraged the Microsoft one that they gave us. But just like you saw before that the Microsoft native Azure firewall doesn't come with a lot of things. It comes with the very basic stuff. But if you're an MSP and you've been managing on-prem equipment, you're used to these WatchGuards, it's not a comparison from the feature set perspective. So why is it difficult? Because we need it. Every time you install a firewall, any type of firewall in Azure, you need to tell Microsoft, hey, I'm not going to listen to traffic coming in from the Microsoft firewall. I need to send inbound and outbound, packets through this firewall interface that you've just created, right? So part of the documentation, I don't know who still has control of the screen, but we scroll down there to the specific areas where we talk about the Azure pieces. That's you actually configuring what's called a route table and allowing and telling Microsoft to say, hey, instead of traffic from the Azure environment going out its normal through its normal NSG group or network security group firewall rules, let's bounce them to the listening port of the WatchGuard. So we're basically sending all inbound and outbound traffic to WatchGuard. So that's why it's a little bit more of complication, because if you're deploying a WatchGuard fresh into Azure, you kind of determine whether or not how that works. But because you're overlaying on top of something that we've already done, that makes an additional step you have to kind of look out for. It's not any harder or easier. I think if you were doing it manually, you would have to do the same thing, except here we're doing it to something that you didn't create originally. I think that was sort of what was confusing in the beginning, right? And we wanted to also, there was a couple of caveats, right? So obviously whenever you click a button inside the Nerdio admin portal, that command goes straight to your Azure environment. But when we were working on this integration with WatchGuard, we wanted to bypass that, right? So we had some exclusions. We said to WatchGuard, we know there are tag partners using Nerdio. We actually don't want that traffic from the Nerdio admin portal to pass through the WatchGuard, because if there was a misconfiguration in the WatchGuard, well, guess what? Now your Nerdio doesn't work. So we work together to kind of bypass those commands straight from where we send our commands from the Nerdio admin portal, to bypass the firewall. So that traffic is still natively going through the Azure firewall, but pretty much everything inbound, outbound from your virtual desktops to your other servers with this integration now go through the WatchGuard. So those are the little behind the scenes key differences, what these screenshots are basically showing you guys.
Cool. Thanks, Tony.
Yep.
I can pass here to next presenter. We'll stop the share.
Who's our next presenter?
Yeah.
I think that's all we had, guys. Unless
Yeah,
you
I think at this
WatchGuard
stage
had-
we're just going to open up to see if there are any questions.
All right.
One thing I did want to add, it's a good example of what John and his team can do with technology integrations at WatchGuard. If there are other products we need to work with, let us know, and we'll test it out and document it too.
Hey, this is Mike from Comtech. Tony, I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about, so I understand what you're doing where you're using the DMZ, or I guess the existing LAN security group, to allow that Nerdio traffic back and forth. Do you recommend scaling down those groups, leaving only the rules that are applicable for Nerdio traffic? Or do you use that overriding rule and leave the rest of the rules in there?
Yeah, I would use the overriding rule and leave the rest of the rules in there because, if I don't want to be responsible for something, breaking because we tweaked things that we no longer needed to tweak, I guess, right? Because if you're forwarding everything through the WatchGuard, then in theory, it overrides everything that Nerdio has set as a default. Lane, I know you guys like my whiteboard stuff. Do you want me to kind of draw out sort of what this kind of looks like from an architectural perspective?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
We got some time, so
yeah,
why not? Let's see, screen one. Share. Maybe just open up my whiteboard app. And I'm just going to draw out like what's really going on here, right? So, a typical Nerdio environment, you have the DMZ zone, right? And DMZ is something that, in Windows Virtual Desktop, we actually don't put anything in out of the box, but it is there. And if you want to, take a server and expose it to the internet, you would just put that server in the DMZ. So we do have 2 subnets created from scratch, and you have your domain controller. You might have a file server, and then you might have your Windows Virtual Desktops, right? So by default, all the stuff is, going out through the regular network security group. And so what we did, and this whole thing lives inside of a resource group called, let's say, Nerdio RG, right? And when you set up a new firewall, a WatchGuard, you actually have to create a new resource group for it. So WatchGuard RG, that's what I'll call it. And the virtual, firewall actually goes in here. And so there's this thing called a route table. It's an Azure service that says, right now, default, everything's going out to the World Wide Web, out from the NSG, for the LAN and the DMZ NSG. So what the route tables say is go here instead, right? And then this WatchGuard is now going out to the internet. So same thing for inbound. And now anything passes through the firewall, you get IPS, you get, all those extra UTM stuff that you don't get with NSGs, right? NSGs, you only get that stateful, allow, deny, CIDR type of thing, right? Even if you pay for the Azure firewall, which is like a $900 a month platform as a service firewall, even that doesn't give you IPS, right? So there's a lot of reasons why you should do this, but the WVD traffic, the WVD is not like RDS, right? It doesn't use port 3389 to go out to the internet. It uses its own platform as a service security layer. But that's where the traffic, the packets go in and out between drawing pixels on your screen and your internal environment. But when a customer visits a website, that stuff is going out through your normal traffic route. So now with the route table, we're able to bounce things off the firewall inbound and outbound. So that's how architecturally that works. Now you have something out here called the Nerdio admin portal, right? Which is basically a series of servers that are hosted by us, some in Azure, some in a data center. And that has specific rules that talk to these servers, right? So when you go and add a new user inside of Nerdio, we'll send that command over to your domain controller running in Azure and say, hey, go add that new user. Now, originally, I think a lot of people who do set this up prior to this integration, we have tons of customers that are already using WatchGuard, prior to the integration. One of the biggest mistakes they did was try to pass this traffic through their WatchGuard, right? They kind of went in this way. But if you did configure it correctly, you would have all sorts of issues, right? So imagine a tech went in here and, for example, turned off a specific rule. Now Nerdio can't communicate with your domain controller, and then now you're going to call Nerdio and say, well, something broke, right? So we didn't want that. So we made some exclusions. We said, all right, with this integration, we don't care that you route, sort of normal internet traffic, but let's leave the Nerdio ranges out of the routing. So that is that only caveat. So Nerdio admin portal traffic does not route through the firewall. So Mike, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that does, and we have done ours a little bit differently. It's kind of a hybrid between the pure WatchGuard method and what you're describing here, where essentially we kept the WatchGuard setup, but I added in manual route table entries for the addresses on, for the Nerdio admin portal addressed and sent them out.
So you did it right, right?
So,
You did it right. I wish everybody would do it that way. But the reason why we told people not to is because in the event that, you know, you didn't know what you were doing or something, or somebody screwed up somewhere, we didn't want the extra, you know, help desk call coming to us. And then now we're trying to investigate what's going on inside our WatchGuard, and we're not experts in WatchGuard. That was the, well,
to be fair, it was fixed after a call to support. So
for our support?
I wasn't able to get by unscathed. Yep.
Yeah. So we were just trying to make this streamlined as possible. So our thing was let's not have everybody route their traffic through it. You could if you wanted to, but you know, just make sure you know how to do it and what you're doing.
Right.
Perfect.
All right, any other questions?
Well, I have a question. Do you know, guys, how much more is the pay-as-you-go versus the bring your own license? I know it's usually a lot more to the point where it's not worth it to do it. I'm just curious.
I'd say roughly about twice.
Oh, yeah? Okay. So everybody should be buying their own license then.
Yeah, pay as you go is good for trials or if you want to do a short burst.
It worked great for this test.
Yeah.
Pay as you go, and as far as the
WatchGuard license.
So we have this is part of the TAG program, so you can purchase these monthly from us through TAG. So
yeah,
and that should be less expensive than the other option, right?
Right. We're doing everything we can to kind of push people to purchase through our trusted channel like TAG. We've set up the program, going through the channel, you get advantage of integrations like this, people that can support it. So even with the BYOL on my slide, I said there's 1 year and 3 years, but as Lane was saying, an advantage of TAG is you can purchase monthly those BYOL licenses.
Yeah, and I have many partners that, you know, every single Nerdio integration, they must have a firewall and it's a WatchGuard. So no, this has worked out great for us.
Great.
I want to jump in and tell you guys, thanks, Brandon, especially you. I've been looking for quite some time on something that would show me very quickly and very easily the breakdown and the differences between what we do with the WatchGuard and what Azure is doing. We've been asking ourselves the question about whether or not there was, don't laugh and fall out of your chair, and the next time you see me, I know you're going to smack me in the head. Where the viability was for WatchGuard in the Azure play, right? And I'm sure you guys probably asked yourselves the same question. After watching this and certainly looking at the way that, Tony, thank you for showing the diagram about how stuff's running through Nerdio. You confirm what I've kind of been thinking in the back of my mind, that on every single one of these things that we do, while we don't look at Azure environments the way that we look at traditional networks, and I hope that everybody that's on this call who's using Nerdio at this point has figured out that a LAN environment and the way that a LAN environment works and performs, it's very different inside of Azure. Azure is all around IOPS, right? And the looping, the way that Tony has really nicely shown, it's really apparent to us now that we need to put this in front of everything that we're doing in order to bring the security up to that level that we become accustomed to at the LAN level. Thank you for giving me simple, easy tools that I can use the crayons and explain to the rest of my team exactly how this is supposed to go, and then we can get it in play.
Great. Thanks, Rick.
don't have any more questions, we will let you go. I want to thank everybody at WatchGuard. This was a pretty decent sized team effort. So thanks to all of you. Tony, thanks for helping me get this going and providing your input as well throughout the whole process. And thanks everybody for joining us. As you may have heard last week, this is really one of the first webinars we're doing around the TAG Azure Accelerated program. So be on the lookout for more of these webinars all around Microsoft Azure and trying to make your lives easier. So we will send out, I did record this, we will send this out. Janet will send out an email to everybody here before long as well. So thanks very much, everybody, and we'll sign off and have a great day.